Hi loves, welcome to today's studio session. And this time I wanted to paint something really sweet and tasty, and I've chosen this strawberry cheesecake with jam. The reference photo is from Unsplash, and I'll leave the link in the description box. And the main things that I like about this photo is first, it's a strawberry season, so I wanted to paint something like this. Then I really like the contrast between light and white objects and deep and dark red jam. So here I have a very beautiful color contrast with white and red and value contrast light and dark. Plus I really wanted to paint some of the background today. For the materials, I am using Rosa Gallery watercolor paints, and this is a Langwo sketchbook with 100% cotton watercolor paper. Plus for the juiciest highlights, I'm gonna be using titanium white gouache by Rosa Gallery. My paint brushes are by Skoda and I am using 3 of them. As usually, I leave the names all of my materials in the description box. And also you can paint this cheesecake with me in my real-time lesson on my Patreon page. I'll leave the link in the description as well. At the beginning of the work, I like to analyze my reference picture. And for this one, I found several challenges for me as an artist. At first, I felt that I need some simplifications here. In the background, for example, I wanted to exclude that gem plate, the fork, and those green leaves. And I wanted to leave the cheesecake, the plate, and the fabric. And also, I wanted to simplify some textures. Seeds on the strawberries, for instance, the jam, the cheesecake body textures, and the folds of the fabric. The next challenge is how to paint light object on a light background, because the cheesecake body is very light and the plate is white and the fabric is white as well. And the challenge is to paint those objects so you can distinguish them from one another and still perceive them as very light. The next interesting moment about this painting is to build rich and juicy reds. If you start with a light red and start gradually adding black, you won't get this rich and appetizing jam feeling. So the approach should be slightly different. And the final thing that had my interest as an artist in this painting is the detail balance. The main thing is not to start painting those details right away, the seeds on the strawberry for example. In order for painting to look appetizing and realistic, at first you need to build those proper values and only then start to add the details. So let's talk about light subject on a light background. One of the interesting challenges in this painting is that almost everything is light, the cheesecake, the plate and the fabric, so I can't rely on strong color differences to separate them. Instead, I'm looking for value shifts. I keep the cheesecake itself very light and most of the separation comes from the warmer color of the cake, the shadow underneath it and the cooler shadow on the plate. The same thing happens with the white plate. Painting something white doesn't mean leaving it completely untouched. I still need those subtle shadows to describe its shape, but I want to keep them light enough for the plate to still feel white. So the main keys for separating a lot of light objects are: keep that warm and cool contrast, paint small volume shifts, paint the shadows and not to go overboard with them so the light objects still feel like light. How to build rich and juicy reds. The red gem is the strongest color in the whole painting, and I want it to feel deep and rich but still juicy. One thing I try not to do is make the entire red area equally dark. I am using a range of reds instead. Some areas stay warmer and more transparent, while the deepest shadows become cooler and much darker. The variation is what gives the gem its glossy, almost translucent feeling. With watercolor, I also prepared to build this kind of color gradually. The lighter layers underneath can still glow through the darker tones, which is much harder to achieve if make everything very dark from the beginning. So two main keys for building juicy reds. The first is to keep light red on the warmer side and the darker red to the cooler side. And the second one is to build darker red volumes with layers. What about simplifying texture? The textures on this photo look much more complicated than it actually needs to be in the painting. I don't want to copy every teeny spot or pore. Instead, I'm looking for a few characteristic marks and placing them in irregular groups. I change their size, shape, and spacing because if everything is too even, it starts to look like a pattern rather than a natural texture. I also don't want the texture to become equally strong everywhere. It still has to follow the form and the lighting. The texture is there to support the cheesecake, not to compete with it. Details come after the form. The strawberry is a good example of why I prefer to leave the small details until later. It's tempting to start adding the seeds immediately because they make it look like a strawberry. But the seeds cannot create the three-dimensional form for me. First, I want the strawberry to work as a simple form, a lighter side, a mid-tone, and a deeper shadow. If it already feels three-dimensional at this stage, then the seeds, tiny dark accents and highlights become the finishing touches. This is something I use throughout the whole painting. First the big shapes and values, then textures, and only after that the smallest details. So the final key for the realism in this painting is to build basic shapes at first and only then add in details. I hope this gave you a better idea of how I think about values, color, texture, and details when I'm painting a subject like this. If you'd like to actually paint this strawberry cheesecake with me, the full real-time lesson is available on my Patreon page. There I take you through the complete process, including the sketch and composition, materials, exact color mixes, layering, brushwork, and all the small decisions behind the finished painting. Thank you so much for spending this time with me, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.